Okay, so this is being recorded. Hi, I'm Deb Roman, and I know a lot of you, and it's wonderful to see all these familiar faces and also people I don't know, so it's great to be here with all of you today. And I'm going to do the introduction for Jay, but what I thought I would do first, I really wanted to take a minute. I don't know if I can walk around while I'm talking with this here, but can I hold this one? Yeah. Or do you have to push it up? Like that? Good. So I wanted to do two things first before I thank everybody who made this possible. And one is I really want to thank all of you because I'm really thanking you from Ada County Medical, I think, and probably from all the people who put this together in the Vitality program. This has been a really hard couple of years, and you guys have been out there doing the work, and I really want to acknowledge that. It's been hard. There's been a lot of trauma. There's been a lot of pain for people, and I just want to acknowledge how grateful we are that you are doing the work that you're doing. And I'd also like, we had a conversation at our table about, and I won't share because it's not, I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but it was interesting because we were talking about kind of transitions, like coming home from work and then going into the house, and how do you have to adjust to those different changes. So I'd like to take a moment today, if it's okay with you, just to kind of pause together before we start the work that we do today. So if you would, maybe just put your feet on the ground. Get a sense where your feet are on the ground. If you're more comfortable, you can close your eyes. I always get self-conscious, so I close my eyes, but whatever feels most comfortable for you. One of my favorite teachers, Thich Nhat Hanh, says that you can allow your feet to kiss the earth. Allow your feet to kiss the earth. And just notice, are your feet balanced on the ground? Are you leaning from one side to another? And then just notice where your thighs are on your chair. Are you sitting level? You can adjust your seat so that you're comfortable. The pelvis is shaped like a bowl. And if that bowl was filled with water, can you tip it forward and backward, side to side, so that the water is still? Find that place of balance. Tap in a little bit to where your chest is. Are you leaning forward into your day? Are you pulling back, perhaps? Maybe a little bit overloaded. Can you find a place in the center where your spine is upright but flexible, kind of like a tree? When the winds come, it will bend, but it won't break. Rooted to the ground through your feet. And then kind of notice where your chin is. Can you bring your chin back so that it's level, kind of parallel to the ground, ears over your shoulders? So often we're bending forward with our heads. A small little curve in the neck, so that your heavy head is sitting comfortably on your neck, over your spine, to your balanced pelvis, down to your feet on the ground. And maybe put one hand on your chest and one on your belly. And notice your breathing. You're breathing quickly. You find it easier to breathe in versus out. Just notice. not trying to change it. And then just notice your body in general. Are there any places that are tighter, feel a little bit more relaxed? Places that might feel heavy? Again, just noticing in the moment where you are. And then take a breath in through your nose, the belly pop out as your diaphragm descends, and let that go. And now maybe take a moment to think of an emotion that you might be feeling right now. Just pick one. Getting a sense of how you're feeling right now. And then if you would, let's take another breath and let that go. Breath in through the nose. Out. And now consider a thought. Something you might be thinking right now. Whatever it is, not trying to change it. And then take another breath. In through the nose, out through the mouth, and let that go. Now for maybe the next 10 or 20 seconds, if you would, think about the things that you've done over the last couple years that have served the people around you and served yourself. We often don't think about those things. And just let them come to mind. And I'll time us for about 10 or 20 seconds. And then finally, let's take a breath together. Take a deep breath in through our nose. Let our bellies fill up and expand. And then breathe out. And maybe one more of those. Deep breath in through your nose. Let your belly expand. And then breathe out. And when you feel comfortable, just open your eyes. So often we move from space to space. It's so funny that we were talking about that at our table. But so often we move from space to space. But we never really, let me say for myself, I don't often reset and kind of acknowledge, where am I right now? You know, what's my body feeling like? What's my mind feeling like? What are my emotions? And again, I really want to thank you for the work you've done. So I have lots of thank yous in addition to that. I want to thank our sponsors. We have St. Luke's as the Vitality Series sponsor. Very, very grateful for that. There'll be 3 of these, excuse me, there'll be 3 of these workshops and meetings throughout the year. And for today, our sponsors are the Idaho Urologic Institute and Full Circle Health. So very grateful for that. I also want to thank all the people that are on the Vitality Committee. And if you wouldn't mind, just raise your hands when I call your names. Abhilash Desai. Thank you, Abhilash. Alan Hines. Ed McEachern, Katie Schneider, Molly McCormick, and Susan Martin. These are all the people that were working to try to figure out this year what we could do that might serve you, that really would serve our community and address some of the challenges that we're all facing and bring all of us together. So a lot of thought has gone into this, and we really would love your feedback so that we know, are these the kinds of things that are helpful? Is this the best way we can serve the community? And there'll be time for you guys to write some of that down, but feel free to reach out to any of the people here and share your ideas too, if that's easier. So there'll be a couple of breaks. You can get up and move around anytime you want. Movement's a great thing. The bathrooms and things are through the doors in the back. But I have a note here that if you need to go take a phone call or something and you need to move to the back, you can please go by the entrance, but not right outside the legal offices. So just so you guys know, maybe that's to protect you. I don't know. I think that I'm not sure about that. So I want to introduce Jay, and excuse me, I just met Jay, and I'm so excited for this workshop for all of us. In the formal sense, Jay is a practicing emergency physician. He's a writer, a medical educator, and an accidental academic. I'm going to let him describe what that means to you. He's a professor and a director of medical humanities and bioethics scholarly concentration at the Alpert Medical School of Brown University in Rhode Island. Mouthful, and I knew I'd have to read the whole thing. So his interdisciplinary work involved response to uncertainty in clinical practice, which requires creativity as a clinical skill, and physicians who think more like writers and artists. And that's what we're going to play with today. Last year, he published Tornado of Life, A Doctor's Tale of Constraints and Creativity in the ER. And he authored 2 award-winning short fiction collections, What's Left Out and 14 Stories, Doctors, Patients, and Other Strangers. But what I'd like to share is that in the short time that I've gotten to know Jay, the one thing I really want to share with you is he really wanted to bring something to us that would be valuable. So he met with us, he met with the committee, and he tried to understand what our community is like and what kinds of issues we're facing, and tried to craft something that he thought would best serve us, which I thought was such a beautiful gift to us, and I really wanted to share that that process was happening. So he's super genuine and down to earth, and I think we're going to have a really wonderful morning. So, but before I bring him up, I just want to thank one more person, and that is Steve Reams, who has really been behind the scenes. Yeah. Steve makes all of this work, you know, and Jennifer in the back there as well does a whole lot, and thanks. Really important. They often are not in the forefront of all the thank yous, and I want to be sure that we acknowledge what they do. They keep us going. So again, I just really am excited to offer or to bring Jay up and have him start working with all of you, and I think that's it. Whatever you think is easier.
Can you all hear me with this for now? I don't know what's going to work. I think we're going to doodle truck. Because what it is, like I talk with my hands. So whenever I have like handheld mic, it's like I go in and out, and so it's a little bit crazy. First off, I do want to thank Steve Reams for we have had multiple conversations, and just being so impressed with him and the Vitality Committee and how they helped inform this conversation. But I have to tell you that what I'm most impressed is like how just the nature and the quality and the profound commitment of this work that's already being done here, which I really feel like it gives me a high bar that I have to meet, because you're all doing such amazing work, and I want to honor the work that you've all done so far. So I want to congratulate you. I want to thank Deb and the committee, the Wellness Committee, for just giving me a lot of background and giving me their generous feedback. I really feel like a bull in a china shop following Deb. It's like, geez, put this in. Like, I actually needed that. Like, I needed that moment to sort of, I was like really sort of between the caffeine and my just baseline anxiety and terror. You know, it was just really good. Like, before, like I was, and I don't know how some of you, how comfortable you were, but I never used to like close my, I used to be the guy like this. You know, like I never be able to do that. And I was sitting there going, oh my God, thank God I closed my eyes. I wanted to do this so much. I needed this, stuff like that. So, and so I feel great. And so I really feel great. So by way of introduction, I just wanted just to share with you some overview. Initially, I was going to just jump right in, because that's my habit. My habit is like try to destabilize situations and to make people a little bit off balance but not uncomfortable. And then people always go, no, you can't do that. You have to like be kinder to your audience. And so I'm trying to be kind. So a couple of things. First is that I've brought a lot of. I'm an academic. The whole idea about being an accidental academic is the fact that I started off in academic emergency medicine at Bellevue in New York and doing ethics a lot. Then I dropped out and I wrote. And I was a clinical, I was in practice in community and doing community emergency medicine. And I was writing and I was teaching more about the connection between my creative practice and writing and clinical practice, and the two were so connected. And then I kept on teaching and writing and doing more of that stuff, and a lot of my work involved working with artists and writers and people from different disciplines about like the different ways we sort of navigate and use like uncertainty and ambiguity and this stuff that's inherently unstable in our work that we just don't recognize. And then I started writing about it, and at one point someone goes, you're an academic. I go, no, I'm not an academic. So I'm not an academic. I'm like an accidental academic, and I will deny it to this day. But what I do, and I try to keep things really simple. Like I am like an ER doc. I just want to like keep things as simple and straightforward as possible. If it's a complex problem, I'm going to make it as simple as possible. If it's a complex problem, and it really is a complex problem, I want to address the complexity. And that's part of the challenge I find is that oftentimes in what we do, we try to, this is our reductionist tendencies in medicine, is to like put labels on things and we minimize the complexity. We don't talk about it. And I feel like coming out of the pandemic, what I discovered is the fact that the challenge that we all had is not that we all wanted answers, but we wanted our experiences validated. We wanted a space to chat. We wanted a place to talk. And that's what I hope that we're going to accomplish here today. So we're not going to be talking about moral injury and moral distress, though we will. Because I feel like when there's all the talks that I've gone to about these topics is that we talk about moral injury, talk about moral distress. We don't talk about the people who are potentially on moral injury and moral distress. We don't talk about our own personal experiences. And 30 years into this of research, and we've been talking about this in sort of the ethics, humanities world for 20, 30 years, is that we haven't really made major inroads. There's a lot of literature, not a lot of major inroads. So what's my philosophy for this session? One, so Kurt Vonnegut has these rules for writing. And his number one rule for writing is the one that I adopted also into my number one rule for education and for talking and sharing experiences. And he said, you should use the time of a total stranger so that he or she will feel that the time has not been wasted. And it's such a low bar, and it's so hard to hit. So that was my goal. That has always been my goal. It's like, I want to make certain that this time is not wasted for you. I realize that this is really a precious cherished time to bring everyone, for you to take time out of your day, on this beautiful day, to come here and to get people of so many disciplines and so many backgrounds and so much experience and so much brilliance into one space for several hours is something that I do not take for granted, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to make certain that we got it right and hopefully make it valuable for you. So, couple things. We'll be talking about what we don't talk about. I'm not going to be talking to you as much. If everything goes well, you're talking to each other. I feel like, what we don't have as clinicians, when I use clinicians, I'll try to use clinicians, but if you look at the literature on moral injury, it involves, initially in healthcare, it was nurses, but there's on respiratory therapists, they're involved social workers, it is doctors, chaplains, and actually even leaders. We don't talk about the leaders can be morally distressed. So I want to make certain that we flatten the hierarchy as much as possible and realize that this is something that impacts all of us, and all of us can have different perspectives, and we bring different experiences to this. So what are those things we don't talk about? Why don't we talk about them? And what are the things that we use? For example, like we don't have time to talk about it. But to what degree is it truly that issue, or the fact that we just don't have the tools, we don't have the trust, we don't have these spaces to talk about these things? So I want to create that. You're going to write. Okay, and I know that most of you are like, oh my God, I'm going to write. I write. And when I go to things that make me write, I'm like, oh my God, I got to write. But it's not about writing. You're going to have, hopefully you have your journal or your favorite writing instrument or whatever. It's about moving ideas across the page. It's something that happens. It's something that happens when you take pen to paper. You access a part of your brain that you don't necessarily you wouldn't think about, that you wouldn't otherwise. When I'm thinking about things, and I actually sit down and write, something different happens. You discover things, you slow things down. When you're trying to put language to a complicated experience, it actually changes the inflection of how you think. You get very specific, you get very precise, which is hence the initial prompt. You also hear your own voice. You identify, kind of when you're blocking. And so that's the last thing I want to share with you here, as a preliminary, is that this is not about being brilliant. This is not about being smart. You're all brilliant. You're all smart. This is about something that I learned about writing that I'm trying to bring into all my years of work. As a teacher, as an educator, is that the biggest inroads is actually in breaking down. It's not in writing. It's like, how do we break down those barriers to get at the kind of conversations we should be having? How do I get what's in my head, what's in my heart, on the page and out? How do I find my voice? But oftentimes by communicating to others, we actually we're actually hearing ourselves speak. And sometimes it feels like we're communicating for the first time. And what we think are the real issues are actually not the issues. They're like the issues we hold on to, but this deeper stuff. Are you going to get there today? I don't know. It takes me a long time to do that stuff. I mean, I'm like, I do this, and it's hard. But I do feel like we can get somewhere. We can move things along. We can get a foundation and move forward. Couple things. Last, before we start, you will not be expected. I hope that everyone will participate, but you don't have to. There's no expectation to actually talk about it. I hope you want to. I hope you'll talk about it in the table. I'll take volunteers for speaking aloud, but don't feel like you need to. This is for you. This is for you. We're going to do it. I broke this up into 3 chapters of this experience that hopefully will move us, to an actionable stage. Because I realized that, one of the things, what became clear from my conversations with you prior to this was that you just don't want to have an event and then just that's it. And it's like how do you use some of the comments, some of the experiences, some of the insights that we get this to plan next steps. And on a personal level, if just one of you ends up sort of just writing and just documenting and making this a daily practice or not daily practice, I consider that the greatest reward for this alone as on a personal level. All right. So the first prompt, your one sentence bio. Anybody want to offer anything? I know. It's always like this, by the way. And so, by the way, I learned. So I do a lot of work with museum educators, with like clinicians and people and with all types in front of a museum painting. And I must warn you, I'm going to warn you this. I've developed a deep comfort for silence. Some people sit there and they go, I'm just going to wait it out. Like I'm going to, okay, no one's talking, so I'm just going to. No, I learned just like silence. Go, oh, silence, come here. Because I'm going to just have Deb. I'll go back and meditate and close my eyes right in front of you. So, any thoughts? Any initial thoughts? Again, this is not about being right. It's not about being funny or brilliant. This is just about like one sentence. What's that?
I love to feed people.
Okay,
I love to feed people.
All right. What else?
Write something and I can't. I write something and I can't spend enough time. I want you present after 12 for 2 hours.
Anybody else? Okay.
I ride bikes a lot.
I ride bikes a lot. Why do you ride bikes a lot? Yeah.
You know that of other crazy people. And what it does for me, and I work in a place full of crazy people too, and so it gives me the transition time between those to kind of get my head, in the right spot, and it also helps. It's kind of the only place I get exercise. So.
Well, I love a sentence it actually is. I have triplets. I ride my bike a lot. Right? I mean, that says so much about someone. So you can you can step into his life in just one sentence. Like, I have triplets and I ride bikes a lot. I mean, you can get a sense of that. That's terrific. Deb?
I sleep with my dog on my head.
See, that's problematic. Like I don't know what the problem is with Deb or with her dog, but that's great. I love that. What else?
I'm a research nerd, and my personal motto is "Silliness is divine."
So that's terrific, by the way. So why is that? What made you come to that? Right.
Really getting into the depth of all things, and the silliness part of it is just because that's my nature. Despite my serious outward and what I do and for the system, I like anything that's fun and adventurous and silly, and costumes or anything like that. Karaoke, give me a mic, I'll start singing, maybe. Anyway.
So that's what's so fascinating about that, because I love the contradictions, because we're not all one thing. Like, we're not all one thing, and I think it's just, no one would ever think that I would never expect to see, like, research nerd and silliness in the same sentence. But it is. Like, we have that in the same life, and it's so perfect, and I love that. Thank you.
So this cracked me up because I was really struggling with the whole action, like what's an action versus what's just a description. And one of my table mates said, maybe you should just write, I overthink things. And that was perfect.
Right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. That's so, and we can stop there. We're actually going home. That's it. Thank you very much, everybody. That was actually great. No, that is so perfect. That is so perfect. So you get a sense of just the expanse of what people will focus on, and more importantly, of what was said. And what I'm trying to get at is, like, how we're getting there. Like, how we're getting there, how we're thinking through that, and really, like, how just these little moments, these little insights can reveal so much about us, but also it's so profound because it is about our identity, not just about us, but it's also a little bit about our identity, and how we can get a sense of someone's life. So what I love, there's something that happens when we're sharing stories. We're storytelling animals. We've done it from the moment thousands of years. It's how we understand ourselves, the world, each other, how we make sense of things. It's how we reason. Is through stories. We're natural storytelling animals. That's what we are. We're storytelling creatures. When you leave here today, they're going to say, hey, how was Baruch? And he goes, oh, I really, really loved that session. It was really fantastic. I think the guy's a moron. I can't believe he did this session, and I didn't understand what he was saying. But you're going to tell a story. You're going to tell a story. It's not going to be data. It's going to be a story. And what's interesting about the difference between story and data is that, with data, looking at you, Michelle, is that, data has to be validated and legitimized. It has to be statistically significant. But our brains latch on to story, even if it doesn't make sense. Like we'll believe a coherent story more than we'll believe data. Just do. That's how cons operate. It's like there's a big science behind that. It's not about how stories can deceive us, but I just wanted you to recognize that stories this is not this thing to go, oh, you're involved with stories in medicine. No, this is the platform in which we live and we communicate. We understand each other and we connect with one another through story. So last thing, let's prompt before we get to work. Anybody want to share the values?
Relieving emotional pain is so important for me.
Okay. Good.
I'm Molly, and I said creativity, dependability, humor, and humility.
Great. What else?
Compassion, connection, dignity, and elevating strengths and story.
The motto for the whole session is going to be don't overthink things.
Respect and compassion.
What else? One more.
Happiness and hard work.
Okay. Anybody, one last one? There we go.
Grace and extending the benefit of the doubt to our colleagues.
Great. Okay. Fantastic. Thank you. So I think we get a sense of the range of values that some of us, think are important, and I'm sure all of you have the values that you've written down. So now what I want you to do is now we're going to roll up our sleeves. If you're wearing a jacket, you can take it off. We're wearing a tie. Good, there's no ties. Take it off. So I want you to write for 5 minutes about a compelling experience that happened to you at work or in your professional life. It doesn't have to be in your professional life if you don't want to. That made you angry, frustrated, or upset. 5 minutes, and I'm going to be secret, and I want to see the pen moving. And if the pen, even if you have nothing, you say, I have nothing to say, I have nothing to say, I can't believe Baruch did this to me, why am I here, he did this really makes me angry that I'm here, he's pissing me off, oh, this also made me angry, and you can keep on going. The important thing is keep the pen moving, and you have 5 minutes. So the prompt is, write for 5 minutes about a compelling experience that made you angry, frustrated, or upset, or gave you some kind of a negative emotion. Now, you can just list them. It doesn't have to be in depth. You can be a list of just different types of experiences. It could be one, but I'd like you to just get a list of types of experiences that you've had, or those particular experiences. Angry, upset, or frustrated. Think about like negative emotions, Dan. One more minute. wrap things up? All right. So listen, you've gone for 5 minutes, so let's just reflect a little bit on the process. How did it feel? Comfortable, uncomfortable, slow going? Yes.
This wasn't slow for me because I'm an OB and I'm so angry right now. Yeah. I was writing about something I was really pissed about. It made me feel like I was reliving it, which wasn't, I don't know if that's good or not.
Okay, great.
I was going to sort of say the same thing. Like, at first I was, like, not that mad, and I was trying to think of, like, a scenario, and then I started writing, and I was like, then I got fired up. I was, like, thinking of every bad thing that ever happened that made me mad.
Kind of on the same line. I started out angry, but as the words came out, it was somewhat cathartic to get them out on paper instead of holding them inside.
I was thinking, I hope I can write, when you ask the opposite question, hopefully, of, like, what are the good things going on, that I can write equally as anxiously.
I was thinking about the EMR and how my hands started cramping after just writing a few sentences. How did we do this in the past? That made me angry. No.
So right after this, you're going to have this is the Baruch prompt template. That's now going to be an epic.
But it was a slow start for me, and then my hands started cramping because I was trying to like put the last thoughts in there. So it was just an interesting experience. How it became more precise, but it was getting harder physically in the end. But my mind was actually much more engaged.
So, like, oftentimes what I get is that people would say, like, the middle, like, I was tough going, and then the middle got, once I got, like, a momentum going, and the middle got easier, and I just kept writing. And some people were surprised at what they ended up writing about. I love, because I'm so angry. I'm angry. No problem writing about my anger. But it's something still about having what's up here and getting it on the page. So now what I want you to do, okay, one question there, sorry.
Thank you. I thought it was interesting that there was the emotions coming out on the page changed me physically, meaning that you start getting that cramping, and about halfway through, I'm like, I got to stop gripping this pen so tight. And that, to me, tells me that my emotions have that physical manifestation that we all need to be cognizant of.
So great. Do you want to come up here? So what I want you to do, we're going to go for another 5 minutes. You continue what you're writing, but I want you to think about the relationship between perhaps that list that was in your value statement, your list of values, and those things that are making you angry or frustrated or upset. So you can move in a different direction. You can continue onward with some of the things you were writing about, but you have another 5 minutes. And again, like, don't think too hard. Follow your emotions. Respect your emotions. And then we'll talk about that in another 5 minutes. one more minute. Wrap things up. Did it. Congratulations. Congratulations. This is fantastic. Okay, feedback on the process, how it resonated with you, the actual process of just writing, getting those ideas down, the content of those ideas, thoughts, opinions, outrages, insights.
It's interesting that when I went back to my values and actually wrote it, I thought maybe my value should have been different. I wrote down what I really was thinking about that value.
Do you want to? Can you be more specific, Darren,
Sure.
Or not if you don't want to?
No, I can. I was talking about at work and kind of what I value at work and some of the frustrations at work that I've had, and what I initially felt as my values was more of someone who was honest and non-judgmental. But what I really find that in my frustrations, there's a value of hard work that I think that I might have overlooked as the actual, really what I think about, what it is that frustrates me, what it is I'm really feeling. Is everyone else doing the same amount of work? It's that sort of value of hard work. So that's how I kind of came back to that instead of the original ones.
That's great.
When I started out angry, I was writing about how I was angry because of my values, and I ended up with I was violating my values because I was angry because of the actions that subsequently were performed.
I appreciate the exercise. As I began, it was pretty simple, pretty straightforward, feeling righteously justified with my anger. And as I continued to process it, I was aware of some of the complexity and my contribution, upsetness with myself, potentially creating a little bit more rigidity with expectation. That is something that I have to own.
I realized that I had a conflict, perhaps with colleagues, that could have been self-destructive, but as I wrote, I realized that communication is important and that there are varying opinions. My opinion is not always the only opinion. And as human beings, to mature as a mature adult, we have to learn to accept other people's opinions. We may not agree with them, but they have a complete right to their opinions as much as I do. And communication is key to all of this.
Thank you. Anyone else? So just for you to think about for yourself, I mean, did you discover anything from those, like just 10 minutes? I mean, that's a lot. That's 10 minutes, like 5 minutes of concentrated writing in a couple of spurts. That's a lot. I realize it's only 5 minutes, but it's not. It's 5 minutes of doing something that for many of you is relatively new. Are you more comfortable with the process itself? Getting to work, getting those ideas down? No, yes, indifference. All right. Well, I hope so. I hope so. And again, I'm trying to keep the bar really, really low. And the reason why we're moving forward is that once we've done this, we've gone through thought about your values, thought about the relationship of our emotions as a signal of our values, and how we discover things by sort of putting things down. So now I want you to sort of write for 5 minutes. And again, don't be smart. Just like write, this is for you. Is write about your relationship to moral distress. Do you have a sense of what it is? Have you thought about it? Are you coming to the concept for the first time? And why? And one of the reasons why I've raised this question is because there was a big study in Britain, the British Medical Association, sort of trying to canvass the types of sources of moral distress and moral injury, and they discovered, around 43 to 48 physicians had no clue, really had no sense of what these things were called moral injury and moral distress. And we use the language all the time, or it seems to be this buzzword that's now being written about and being talked about. But what is your relationship to this term, to this word? And your relationship could be, I'm totally disconnected from this term. I have no idea what it is. Or this is what I think it is. How this connects to me and what it means to me. So again, make it about you. It's about you, not about me. It's about you. 5 minutes. 45 seconds. Wrap it up. All right, how we doing? Tired. Are you tired? Exhausted? You wish you want to go home? I'm ready to go back to work. Thoughts?
Yeah, I really like this prompt. I feel like I have a near and dear relationship with moral distress, and for me, it kind of, I think we all have a lot of choices to make on a regular basis, and I mean, moral distress is it's like a dilemma. So it's like a choice that involves moral implications, and it feels like something I deal with on a regular basis.
Great.
I think it's my relationship with distress is complicated, but I think as a psychologist, I was like, oh, I'm going to solve this. But I think my moral compass is like pointing east and out of Idaho right now, and so I feel like that's complicated because it's like something I don't feel in control of. Like I can't fix it, so I'm thinking like, oh, then I just leave. I'll go somewhere else. And that's not a solution. And then it makes me like have other thoughts of like, am I quitting? And if I don't do this work, who's going to do this work? And like, it's just very complicated.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. And I think the other thing is if we all leave, then we just aggravate the problem, because then what's left is people that, we lose the balance of people with different perspectives. And my moral distress is, I think we all probably can identify with the legislature, is just people making decisions without looking at the consequences or looking at both sides. Like I think as a medical community, we're used to a scientific method where, you look at all pieces of evidence and you weigh the consequences and you make a decision based on facts, and that's not what's happening. And it's really distressing to see incredibly important things that affect so many people and have so many repercussions being made on emotion or bias rather than on facts. Very distressing.
All right. Pretending to ignore me.
Where's the mic? I lost the mic. It's like...
Is it there?
You're on the computer and you can't find the cursor on the screen, and you're sitting there and you're moving your finger across the thing and you can't find the cursor. I couldn't find the cursor. I'm looking like, where's the...
I think before I identified what I was feeling as moral distress, it was actually exhaustion and frustration. So when I finally realized it, it was because I was feeling compelled to act or practice medicine in a way that was not consistent with my values. So, a simple example would be, a patient compelling you or wanting you to prescribe narcotics or something like that, or providing a level of care that was so beyond for like a patient who is end of life, and those sort of morally distressing. And then I would say equally would be, a colleague who acts inconsistent with those values as well. So the patient comes back wanting narcotics because the previous doctor, of course, prescribed for them. So those sort of situations, I realized they were actually contributing to my level of exhaustion. But once I identified it, it was easy to kind of deal with.
So what we're going to do is I'm going to put a pause. I'm not stopping this call. I'm putting a pause here, because what I want you to do is we'll just say like the next, take the next 3-4 minutes, and I want you to write down 10 situations that you consider morally distressing? You mentioned 3. And you're going to say, like, why 10? Like, why 10? Why are you doing this to me, Jay? I'm doing this to you because, like, we have, like, this data dump on the top of our head. You know, is this, like, been proven, like, in a lot of creativity research where, you know, we have these ideas that are just sort of right there. We're ready to, like, just throw them out there. But 10, like, really pushes us. You know, I want you to get uncomfortable. I want you to think about even those smaller moments that maybe you would not have thought about because you have some really high-level concerns that are sort of dominating your attention span, deservingly so. But I also want you to sort of just go to that place. If you can't get to 10, that's totally great, but try to get to 10. A couple of minutes. Oh, another minute. Want to wrap things up? So, process question first. How did it feel? Did you feel it became easier than initially when you first started during the breakfast session, that you're able to sort of list some things down in these distressing situations? Did you go further than your initial, when you initially started? Did you go deeper, or were you surprised? I'm sorry? What is moral distress? We're going to get to that. What do you think moral distress is, Eugenia?
I'm distressed it violates my values, but I'm not sure that I know the difference between that and I'm just distressed.
Great point. Love that. What else?
I can just tell you as a nurse, and I do both sides now, non-clinical, moral distress as a nurse, we always feel like the patient and the care and the team is dependent on us, so we don't know how to say no, right? So we'll keep picking up another shift, because they'll say, hey, your colleague has not gotten a day off. So you're like, oh, great. So my day off, I'm going to come in for that colleague because you feel bad for them. And yet it's patient safety, right? Like, how safe is it to work 10 days in a row? That's moral distress.
Okay, sure. Okay. You guys are way deeper than I am. So when I was thinking about this, you said I could put just comments about what I thought moral distress was or didn't. And although I recognize it in others, or I feel like just sympathetic, like as we do as providers, we try to tell people that it's important to manage those things, or we talk about wellness or mindfulness. But when I thought of it for myself, I thought indulgent, decadent, like, why am I even thinking about that for me? Like, we just do it and we suck it up and we take another person's place, and there's no time for that in what we do.
Did you?
At first, it was kind of hard. I had, 3 quick things that came up that, at work that I either observed or have experienced on our team. So I had to sit there and think a little bit. And then I started looking back in time and realized there were several personal things that came up, or moral distress. And sometimes we don't always equate it even in our personal lives, like where we've had to keep quiet over something when we should have spoken up, or things like that.
So, anybody, last one before we come up against?
Tired by the end of it. I just, like, my body and my brain just felt tired.
That's great. Thank you. I don't know. I apologize. I don't want you to be tired. I want you to be, energized. But I think it's because we're going to some place. It's a little bit of work. And you've all been extraordinary. Like, this has been a good opening. It blew me away. I'm not surprised from what I heard about you all. But I just want to just touch on a few things before our break. Is that, what is moral distress and moral injury? What's the difference between moral injury and moral distress? And, and the problem is that when you're in that moment, these things don't compute. All I know is that I feel lousy. Moral injury and moral distress, have been, with moral distress being more of a situational component and moral injury being the sort of the longer-term psychological implications of unaddressed moral distress. All I know is that I feel lousy. And I've realized that years over my career, I basically have written both my fiction and my nonfiction has emanated out of moral distress. That's been the start of it. And even having written about it and having published, I still don't identify it as moral injury or moral distress, though it would fit under the definition of moral injury and moral distress. So the reason why I didn't want to come with the foregrounding of the definitions is because there's so many different definitions. It can be a violation of our code. So I'll just throw out a couple of the common ones. And for those of you who are going to be here, you don't have to worry about writing them down. I'm going to have it on a slide tonight. And if not, Steve can send out I'm more than happy to share my slides from this evening with you all. And, I think the most basic summation of all of them is the fact that, this idea about a violation of our core values, transgression, and it's usually due to some kind of constraints, some internal or external constraints, and we'll talk about those when we come back from our break. But the thing is about what I want you guys to think about is the experience, and what totally just floored me is, I don't know how many of you know the cartoonist, graphic novelist, Linda Barry, who's, I just love. She has a couple of books about sort of the creative process that are basically just graphic novels in the graphic form. It's extraordinary. One is called What It Is, which I highly recommend. And she writes about one of the questions she asks is, what is an experience? We talk about experience, like what is an experience? And is an experience something you have, or is it something that has you? And I feel like we feel that tug, we feel this experience, we feel these things that have us, but we're not aware of it. Like we push it down, we push it back. If we address it, we might feel like it's an indulgence. Like what of us? Like why are we spending time doing this? Like we have all this stuff to do. It might, we make excuses to not acknowledge it, or we don't recognize it. Or worse than that, we consider it normal. When I hear about what, some of the ideas that are I feel so prevalent, and you guys got at, like you got there, which is the role of emotion. Like we don't pay attention to our emotions. We try to tamp down our emotions, right? We don't honor our emotions, but we don't really talk about the fact that emotions signal something, signal a place that we should be paying attention to. And I know for myself, like I get angry, when I get upset, it's usually when something's at stake at work. Like I don't get worried about having not enough time. I get angry for certain things, and it's usually always moral in nature. It's usually something like core values being violated. That's when I get short. When I find myself getting short, when I find myself maybe cutting off patients, when I find myself like not being the funniest guy in the room, and being curt with my nurses, it's usually because there's something else going on. So the value of emotion, learn to signal our emotions. The role of the realizing there's a violation. It's a violation. It's something core but we don't necessarily recognize it. We just recognize the emotion. And then the fact that someone mentioned, you mentioned it about like seeing a problem from another point of view. The fact that our emotions, when we're in that, it constricts our ability to respond. Like when we're in it, that value of emotion is that it's sort of is a signal, but it's also a constricting force. And when we're there, when we're sort of in that energy, we might not actually be open to other points of view and other perspectives. And what we're going to talk about moving forward is, I love the comment over here about, is it distressing or is it moral distressing? It's so critical, because what we do is hard. What we do is distressing. There's so much distress, and we knew that going into this. But when do we sort of cross that line where something becomes distressing and moral distressing? We'll talk about that after break. So thank you so much. And Steve, you'll signal us when we come back. So, welcome back. You did so the good news is, like, you kind of did the hard part. It was just like entering into the space and being so game and going along and participating and contributing. I realized that there was something that was really unnerving about this for all of us in some ways. And it's the quiet. Something about sort of like just being quiet and not having all the distractions and getting rid of all the junk and can't blame anything else. We always say when there's all this noise around us in our work, whether it's noise in our head or actually the physical noise of just like beeps and monitors and all that stuff, they go, God, it's so like, I just want to think. And then you get a chance to think, and you're like, oh my God, I just wish there was some noise. It's so quiet. It's so uncomfortable being here. I have nothing to do but think and feel, and it stinks. But it doesn't. It doesn't. The literature on sort of moral injury and moral distress, really doesn't come up with. It feels a lot like pain to me. It's like, pain scales. 1 to 10. What's your pain on a level of 1 to 10? You know, it always felt so artificial to me. It's like, what's that mean? Like, and it's a vital sign, and it's not really a vital. I found pain scales morally distressing. And I did, because it was morally distressing. And the reason why it was a moral distress was the fact that, one, we were taking a subjective experience and making it into an objective finding. The same thing with our, blood pressure and, blood pulse rate, respiratory rate. They're not the same thing, yet it was put in the same, this is a fifth vital sign. And that sort of policy and that sort of step down, I go, that's just so wrong. I hate that. But then what I realized and why it became also morally distressing to me was that we're then making decisions on that number. That's subjective. Because some people can be in extreme amount of pain and their pain's a 5, and some people they'll look totally great and they have a pain scale of 9, and they still might have an incredible amount of pain, but they just manifest it differently. Their experience with pain is different. And just as I have trouble with a lot of definitions of moral injury and moral distress, it's really difficult to actually have the definitions of pain, right? And then a lot of the experts talked about, I think what's most interesting about pain and studying pain and examining pain is the way it slips away from us, the way we can't capture it. And Elaine Scarry, who's at Harvard, she wrote this book called The Body of Pain. And she has this comment in there that sort of really just sums up the challenges that we have, the moral problems I have with pain, which is to have pain is to have certainty. To hear about pain is to have doubt. And that seemed to sort of getting at it. And I realized that, one of the morally distressing situations that I had, not just distressing, but morally distressing, getting back to Eugene's comment, what's the difference, was what do I do with that one patient who has dental pain? Simple thing, dental pain. Someone who's gone through tons of, comes in frequently, but not too frequently, lost in the system, works hard, comes in the middle of the night, works 2 jobs, all these things, tells what things don't work, and he comes in asking for a narcotic, just some help, and I talk about I hated those. I'd much rather have you come in dying than me having to write a simple pain pill. It was awful. I hated it. I was like, oh my God, I hate this. And the issue was, I thought it was, am I treating someone's pain, or am I feeding his addiction? And the problem is, I don't know. I don't know. That's what I thought the problem was. And I started writing about it, and I was like, no, is that really the problem? And then I'm like, no, I think the problem is that it's one of trust. Because at the heart of it, the only way in is his story. And so really what's the core is do I believe him or do I not believe him? And that felt totally awful. Because this really is, I'm bringing judgment, I'm bringing bias, all these other things I bring to this full decision of whether I write a narcotic for his pain, piercing with dental pain. And then the last thing, I was like, is that it? I go, no, that's it. I think what's really it is that if I don't treat him, and he came and he has pain, and he came to the ER with a simple problem of pain, and he's going to go home still in pain. Well, what does that say about me? I felt like a fundamental need that I could have addressed, and I didn't. So, and this is all the things I sort of discovered through, just sort of trying to unpack why do I feel so upset? Why am I angry with these pain patients who are coming in for pain? Why should I be angry with you? You're coming through for help. And I can say yes or no, and I can address that. But I have those tools in my tool belt, and I can choose whether to use them or not. And the stakes are high either way. If I'm wrong, and there's addiction, I deal with overdoses all the time. The stakes are high. So I really want to talk about these really small moments, these small little moments that sometimes are so emotionally charged for us. So the first thoughts from the first session, first chapter, so to speak. Things that surprised you, things that annoyed you, things that you found interesting, either from your own process or from others, just for a few minutes before we jump in. Absolutely. Oh, absolutely. I couldn't hear you. I'm sorry.
A difference between the written policy and the expectation of how work is actually performed, like nurses being put in the position of having to do workarounds and then being criminally charged.
Thank you. Yeah, we're going to get to that. Alice?
I was surprised when I did my 10 things. You know, I was kind of running out. And then I thought, I actually think I have moral distress, you know, like I was talking earlier about the state or the country. And then obviously, you know, it happens at work, but then even at home. And I was kind of surprised when I had to dig deep for the 10 things that how pervasive moral distress can be in all facets of life.
Yeah, thank you.
You know, I think the process for me is amazing. To have the freedom to really write what I feel and not try to couch it in other terms or, you know, sound a particular way, just felt amazingly freeing. And you know, to James's point, almost like you could feel your body like letting go of stuff and really being so honest on the page that insights that I hadn't thought of just were right there. But I needed to really be honest about what I was feeling.
I just want to build on what Deb says. I love the authenticity of hearing the audience share pissed off. You know, we're professionals. We say we're pissed off? Well, we're humans. And then some of the bodily reactions. And so I appreciate hearing that.
But you didn't rename the Vital Wellness Committee the Pissed Off Professional Committee?
Hey, I found myself, it's kind of interesting. I started thinking about moral injury from whose perspective. And as I was writing this, one of the things that popped into my head, I have a brother who has a very different set of, I think, moral standards and probably values than I do. And he and I, despite that, are really close. And so I talk to him more than I talk to my other siblings who have probably very similar values. And I started thinking about, his name's Bruce, by the way, and I started thinking, well, how would Bruce write these things? And what kind of conversation would that lead us to? And from what perspective is moral injury just being pissed off or legitimately moral? And then I found myself also thinking about, well, if I have to honor my brother's story, how do I do that in a way that allows us to have a dialogue about those different values that's not caustic? And one of the things that I think I'm going to do after this is I think he lives in Nashville, and he's an electrical engineer who builds analog recording studios in Nashville, which is a great job. But he's got a couple of stereos that I'm a huge audiophile that I want, that you can't ship. So I think what I'm going to do is ride across the country with him and have this dialogue as that. Because where my head went was, I think we have different ways of dealing with unordered spaces, chaotic, complex, unknown and unknowable spots. And we need a way to figure out how to have a cogent, convergent conversation that's accretive instead of caustic. And I don't know how to do that.
There's something about creating, so what's Cinda Rishton, who's a PhD nurse ethicist, very prominent, who's been doing this work in this arena for decades, you know, described as sort of these moral reflective spaces, you know, and like how do you create, and one of the problems is the fact that, you know, we often are very sort of quandary oriented, We end up having these discussions after something happens. Like this is a debrief. We're talking about this bad thing happened. Usually it's bad. Rather than having these reflective spaces as a process. And why this is important, and this is what they found from a few sort of decent empirical studies, is the fact that what people wanted, what they found was most important and relevant to them, was one, creating the opportunity. All of you here, what you're doing, which is amazing, the fact that you showed up. Two, is actually having these conversations and valuing voice, and that even people who were in situations for which there was a lack of control, so this idea of a lack of control, to be sort of complicit in situations for which we have no control, that there's giving voice to experiences and having those experiences acknowledged is a form of empowerment. And that there are certain things that we can't control, but there are certain things we can control. What are those things, and what do people want, and how do we address it? What they want, at the very least, at least from the studies, and I think I use they, but I think it's us, all of us. We want to be able to have these conversations without judgment, without penalty, and feel like we're being heard. And we want it to be sort of flatten the hierarchy as well, which I hope we accomplish here as well. One of the elements that's common to most of the definitions of moral distress is one of constraints. We can't act we can't act according to our values due to constraints. So, before we jump into it, I want to sort of get your brains working and get your pen working again. And I want you to sort of write down, your list of constraints, a list of 10 constraints. And just to give you an example and think about constraints are sort of like a limitation. And we've actually talked a little bit about, people have brought up the various different constraints already, whether you realize it or not. So one is going to be like, nursing and socialization and being part of a team hierarchy, this sort of socialization to follow orders, to be able to enact things that perhaps they don't feel are inconsistent with their values. It can be a lack of assertiveness. It can be self-doubt. It can be these internal constraints that we don't really acknowledge. We always talk about like the system, but there are internal constraints too. A lack of full understanding of a situation. But there are also the external constraints, whether it's staffing, not enough staffing, challenges of collaboration, the hierarchies of the team, administrative support or lack thereof, policies and procedures, just as examples. So I want you to sort of take a couple of minutes and just give me a list of 10 constraints that you feel most impact you and your work. Another minute. Remember the motto, don't overthink. Okay. Thoughts on the process or things you want to share of constraints? Ron?
Physician ratings, press Gany, or Google reviews.
Can you talk about, can you just spend a loose date on that for a sentence or two about what about that?
No, I go through Google and look at physicians' ratings of people I know, and people who make decisions not giving the pain pills get lower ratings. I worry about the people who have 5-star ratings. I probably would prefer to see somebody with a 3.5 rating.
Time and money. Like, I appreciate that I'm here. I'm not a provider. There's 4 of our staff here, but none of our providers here because they're in the clinics making money. So I think money is always a constraint. Like, we make decisions around how many patients do they need to see a day, et cetera. So I think money is always going to be a constraint.
Patient satisfaction scores and money. What else?
Our resources, which I guess. Resources, which is tied to time and money too, but treating patients maybe out of your scope because there's not a specialist to send them to, especially behavioral health.
Scope of practice. Okay, great. Anybody else? Insurance companies. Eliminate just a couple of other sentences too.
Just when I think I know what the patient would help, and their insurance company won't cover it, or they have a super high deductible and they can't afford it. Gets back to money, but.
Who's making decisions, your ability to practice best care.
Conflicts between physicians and nursing staff with the administration staff.
Can you drill that down a little bit? That's great. What else?
Well, sometimes they come up with decisions that seem counterintuitive or counterproductive to how we're taught to practice medicine.
Great.
I feel like my list has changed a lot in the last year on this. I have state law, Idaho legislature, idealistic lobbyists, having to talk to attorneys before I do patient care, having to brief administrators who are not in my specialty, having to explain state law and federal law to nurses and physicians who aren't keeping up with it. Those are all, I think, new and different for me in my specialty this year, and they're such difficult constraints to work through.
So the saying, one size does not fit all, is so true when you're owned by a system that's in Michigan. So we have a lot of constraints with that when processes and policies are made based upon their system out there and then placed upon us over here.
Okay. So listen, unless does someone else want to, before we move on, anybody else have anything else? I don't want to cut off conversation. All right, I'm not cutting off conversation. So what I want you to do now, is I want you to take a situation from it. So I think this is fantastic. Now I want you to become like, I want you to make things small. Make things small. So I want you to take one situation from your moral distress list, conflict list, and think about the constraints, particular constraint in the relationship between that, and write about that particular situation. Write it. So get with that. Now, instead of doing a list of things, you write about one particular situation, thin and deep. It can be anything about that situation. It could be the details. It could be how it made you feel. It could be the repercussions of that. But I want you to get very specific. Very specific. What happened, what you hope would have happened, the constraints, how it made you feel. Perhaps you can become perspective of the impact on you, your colleagues, the patient themselves. We'll do this. I'm going to let you go for 10 minutes. For those of you trying to get into it, like, what do you thought the right action was? How you prevented from making that right action? Barriers. another minute. Okay, let's wrap it up. Excellent. And some of you are really going at it. I want to give you orange slices for more nutrition. It's like, you can do it. Come on, this is beautiful. Reflections on the process, the content of what you wrote about, places of resistance, discomfort, insight, pleasure.
Without even getting into specifics, I realized the actual scenario that I was describing was something that I was told I can't talk about.
I just want to go on record. I think Abelard is doing such a much better job of getting people the mic. Because he's sitting there stretching. I think he pulled a hammy, so I just want to acknowledge. In his burst to be like the sprinter, he's been great. So thank you. Go ahead, Michelle.
The process of writing on this particular situation, this was actually really insightful because it kind of helped me really dive into what was bothering me about it. So it was good.
Great. Anything else?
By writing about it, I realized that I put a lot more clarity around it, and so it didn't seem quite as large or insurmountable as it had when I first started thinking about it, and when I first wrote that thought down. Once I fleshed it out, some ideas and some thoughts about how to approach it came to mind, and it doesn't feel quite as overwhelming now.
We'll get to that. Thank you. Darren.
So, I had the opposite experience where I got more frustrated the more I wrote about the situation and maybe more self-righteous, I don't know. But mine felt different in that the more I wrote about it, the more it seemed that those constraints are real and they're not going away, and I have less impact than I thought I had when I started writing.
Which happens. Okay.
I had a similar feeling that I felt like, man, if people could just understand what I'm putting down here, they would believe and think just like me. And I realized it's probably a myth.
Okay. So, considering what you just wrote, right, if you can, if you're up for the task, I want you to write about the same situation from the other person's perspective, the other constraint, the other side of things, where that barrier might be. How might they look at the same situation? And if you really want to sort of distance yourself a little bit, use I from their perspective. So it's not like you thinking for them, but actually thinking as them. And don't be afraid to go crazy and just invest and wear that other perspective, that other voice. But I want you to honor it, and you can use the I if you want to. And I know it's not you; it's this other stakeholder. Let's take 5. 30 seconds or so. Finish up. Okay. I told you that you guys are doing a great job. You really are. I'm very impressed. How was it? Anybody want to insights on the process, on the content? What things you described by flipping?
Thank you. I think one of the key things that keeps coming up for me today is not just that people have different goals or opinions, but that they're being somehow disingenuous in what their goals really are. And as I was writing this and putting myself in the other person's shoes, I thought about some values that someone, I think on the side of the room, when they were talking about their values for work, they said grace and benefit of the doubt. And so this really put me more into the mindset of, I might be assuming that these people are disingenuous, but maybe I should afford them a little more grace and benefit of the doubt.
Thank you.
I wrote like a raw response of a patient who didn't get pain medications, who came in pain, and their issue was not addressed. They felt that, the laws that are out there don't apply to me, and I'm not getting what I need because of all those other people, and I'm legitimately in pain and that kind of thing. I think where I come out at the end of that is I think we just need to have very honest conversations with our patients. You talked about leveling the hierarchy. I feel like we need to level the hierarchy with our patients and have those real conversations. What are the challenges I face as a physician, so they understand where I'm coming from, and then I can understand where they're coming from too.
Okay. My first reaction was, are you me? Means, S, it starts with the word S, that you want me to see other person's perspective when I'm ready to, off them.
I got tired of thinking about work, so I was thinking about my husband, with whom I love dearly. But we don't exactly have the same perceptions of we have the same basic ideas of right and wrong, but our nuances of that are quite different. And I found it extremely difficult, actually, to put myself in his place because I spent so much time thinking about what I think he is. So it was a good exercise, but I'm not sure. It will take me a lot more to actually put myself in his place.
What would it take to actually put you in that place? Like, what's the limitations? What's the barriers? Where's the friction or resistance? Or do you feel like, why can't you go there? Is it hard to go there?
It's very hard to go there because I believe that many things. I believe the world has many shades of gray,
right.
And that is my character.
Yes.
But my husband's character is that things are black and white. Now, for raising small children, that was fabulous. But I don't know how to think that way because it isn't my way of thinking, and I don't know what my place is in helping him understand that life is full of grays, because it allows him to hold to his own morals when he is black and white, and I'm not sure where my role is in that.
Just so you know, your husband's right out there. We invited him to come in. Thoughts on the process, obstacles, even if you couldn't do it, why it might have been a challenge for you,
I thought even getting started was a little bit of a challenge because I had to make a decision I was writing about a patient interaction as well, and then writing from their perspective, had to make a decision to say, like you were saying, give them the benefit of the doubt, and is this going to be a positive experience on their end, or is this going to be a negative experience? And even just choosing to have it be a positive experience was, I don't know, it was just, it made me want to go like kind of choose your own adventure and write about the two different scenarios, the two different ways this could go. But just choosing to say like, okay, well, I'm just gonna try and stay positive right now was kind of helpful. So
I found the exercise to be extremely difficult, meaning it created a lot of work. And I think that's why I know I like to be black and white, because I'm lazy. And I don't have to, if you see everything black and white and there's a dichotomy is good and bad, then it's a lot easier, because this is hard work. So maybe I need to spend more time on that work individually.
So just to jump on what Molly just said and what you just said, is the fact that I think what we don't recognize, so this is the moral challenges I have when we talk about having these conversations and this idea about sort of like, empathy and putting yourself in the quote unquote, putting yourself in the shoes of the other, is in itself can be a morally distressing situation, because it really is hard to put yourself into someone else's situation. Especially if you're in that moment and you have these emotions running, you're in this sort of this sympathetic tunnel, like you're all like epinephrine, and you're sitting there, and like it's really hard to break out. It's hard to do it when you have coffee and a couple of hours and a knucklehead just giving you some forcing you to do some writing. So imagine like we're in that moment, like we're in that situation. We're actually in the clinic, we're taking care of patients' emotions that are driving. It's even harder. And I feel like what makes it never is easy for me, but what makes it easier is recognizing that perhaps I have to step out of it, recognizing that I have to open up. What I think is interesting is that there's something that happens when you write, like there's a technique. Sometimes when I'm writing, and I'll always write an entirely different, the same scene, the same story, the same essay from another perspective, and use the eye. And what you find is that if you really go there, if you allow yourself to go there, sometimes it's kind of freeing, because look, it's not me, it's this voice, Get some distance from the situation. Actually, gives you some distance, because it's not you, it's them. Also, sometimes you can go to some outlandish places and go, oh, that's kind of ridiculous. Would they really say that? Would they really do that? But also, you pay attention differently. Like what you choose, like we don't realize that what we see, what we pay attention to is a choice we make, because we have all this content, all this signaling going around, and we're choosing what to focus on. And I always love this idea from Dino Kahneman, the cognitive psychologist, who wrote about the fact that this idea about overconfidence. One of his research, there was many, many different things, but one of them was overconfidence in many fields, including us, including those of us in healthcare, especially physicians. And he made a comment about overconfidence being a failure of the imagination, meaning that if we can't move our mind in unanticipated and unexpected directions, we have no reason but to think that the way we're looking at things is true. So it's like a muscle to move yourself, to recognize it and then move that muscle. It's not, and it's work. It's work, but it's not. Sometimes there's a lot of work. But again, like we're thinking about low-level stakes here. We're thinking about this is keeping things simple. And I find that sometimes just knowing that someone can look at this thing differently just allows me to sort of like get into this quieter place, even to contemplate it. So that's why I wanted you to make this movement, just make that movement and see what happens. And if you can continue to make that movement, find ways to make that movement in our busy day, sometimes it can be very helpful. The last part, as we sort of rotate and sort of come on our way home, is this idea about sort of advocacy, like what can we do? So what I would love for you to do, just jump that off, is to write for like 5 minutes. You can either pick the scenario you wrote about, or take a scenario from your sort of moral distress list, constraints list, whatever, and write for 5 minutes about what you wish would have happened. Like if you had to come up with solutions, if you had to come up with an idea, like I was in this situation, I had faced this, and this is what I wish would have happened, and didn't. So thinking, turning the corner about like, what you would have done, or what you would like to have seen that happened, or what do you think could have prevented that? And we'll go for 5 minutes. One more minute. Okay. Thoughts, ideas. Come up with solutions. You can come up with just what do you think would you like to have seen happen. What's the barrier there? Is it the fact that you can't even imagine that? Those barriers not being there? Is it your reluctance to talk about that? What would be the challenge, the resistance? Is it too overwhelming to give a voice to?
I was kind of waiting for your hand to go up higher, but I think for me it was kind of knowing that you can't go back and change it, and nothing will change it in the future. It was one of those events that were so traumatizing that even talking about it now is still.
As we go through the process of, what it was and then the other person's perspective, and then, what could you do to resolve that moral distress or that moral conflict that developed. And I think as I wrote through that, it's understanding that not everybody really has the same goal in this situation. And if that's the case, that conflict may never go away. You're not all going towards the same goal. So
I think for what I felt was like maybe not feeling safe, like in a kind of power differential. Like if I were to advocate for myself, then that could be not a safe place. And then what would be the fallout of that? So I was thinking about what we call psychological ache. I was having I can do this, I can keep doing this where I'm at, but if I do this, then that might just be the thing that puts me over and done. So kind of like status quo thinking.
Any other thoughts?
I came up with a very step-by-step, this is how I could fix this situation, but thinking about it, reflecting on it, if it was that easy, the problem wouldn't exist in the first place. So there's more to it that I can't put my finger on right now, because otherwise I wouldn't have the problem.
I am not a doctor or a nurse or a healthcare professional.
But you play one on TV.
But yes. But this has still been very helpful for me. And I'm dealing with a stepmother who's on dialysis. And my dad's been dead since 2015. She moved here. She's an unpleasant, bigoted person, a Fox News, casualty. And so I think a lot about, I'm the only person really in her life other than the woman that comes and cleans and helps her shower once a week. God, I'm really getting off on this. But the thing that I liked about this was it got me to think about, what am I going to do? How am I going to feel when she's gone? And how I might enlist others to, as stuck as I am, how I might enlist others to have her life be a little less lonely.
That's it. So, you know, I always, here's why I included this last step for several reasons. One is because I want us to come out of this with some, like, for you to think about how you can sort of take what you've learned here, what you've discovered by the process, back to your teams, either your personal life, into your teams, your institutions, and make it somehow applicable to you and how to have these conversations. Because having these conversations, as we've seen, is not easy. But we all recognize that sort of moral distress and moral injury is there, and there are consequences for that. From association with burnout and PTSD, and to sort of pragmatic issues like staffing and physician and healthcare force attrition. And ignoring it is not as I'll talk about this evening, has its own consequences. But I feel like in the comments that came across, certain things came to pass that we don't necessarily talk about. One is that these experiences can be deeply personal, deeply traumatizing, and it just takes a lot to revisit them. Because the last thing we want to do is actually revisit. We want to avoid it and forget it. But oftentimes it's just perpetuating the challenges that we're facing. And that itself can be a moral challenge, because obvious things happening more and more, or again, or how we really meet the challenges. So one is the fact that it's deeply personal. Second is that I love the idea of sort of moral injury, reframing moral injury and moral distress, not as this problem with healthcare force workers. It's sometimes given a negative balance, like this is a failing on our part, this is a weakness on your part. But how do we use it as an instrument that sort of highlights impairment of our deep moral values? Something's at stake. And what seems to be coming across in the studies that have been done, that I don't think we need empirical research to see this, but it's nice to see some stuff emerging, is the one of finding ways to empower healthcare workers, whatever that means. Generally, the things that I've mentioned has been giving voice. How do we give voice? So when we were talking about this session with Steve and the group, we wanted us to say, what's the next steps that emerge out of this? And we sort of had three framings, from a personal perspective, empowering, giving voice to ourselves, recognizing ourselves, interpersonally, within our colleagues or our teams, institutions, people in our institutions, and third, advocacy in public, taking this on the public sphere and impacting on others. So that's what we'd like to sort of focus on now, and sort of think about how we can continue the conversation, even if it's not the way this is done here, but the conversations that you think would be sort of valuable for you moving forward. Will come up, Steve, or thoughts. You don't have to be personal, but just what you think might be helpful, what you would like to see emerge out of this. I know Deb's going to have a couple of announcements and maybe some thoughts as well.
Jay, so one of the things, I don't know whether we'll have time, but to talk about is moral awe. An example would be I treat patients with dementia and autism, and I see some of them and their family members, it's like, how do you do it, They're positives despite everything that has happened, And sometimes it feels like my problems are really small, and yet look at them, and I'm like time just stops there. Anyway. Right,
and I feel like that's part of our that's who we are, right? Like we go to work, and we have these problems, and we go to work, and we go, oh my God, we thought we had problems. Like look at our patients, what they're going through, and we do that all the time because part of it is like it's true. Like sometimes I'm like there for the grace of, whatever deity you will obey. There with the grace of God go I, right? Like thank God I don't have those problems. Like I have them, and I'm grateful to have the problems I have. But, as I've learned, going on 30 years of being an ER doc, is that, we do have our problems. We do have our challenges. And I feel like just owning up to that with the full respect and dignity that it deserves is a first step. I mean, recognizing that we have to sort of acknowledge this, especially since many of us are going through so many different things. Some of us going through huge things, life-changing things. And no matter whether it's a big thing or a smaller thing, we have to at least recognize the experiences that we're going through, and honor that.
You talk about what to come out of this, and I was just thinking, so I've been in this community for 30 years, and we used to have ACMS lunch meetings and our, morning conferences. Everybody blocked their clinic off and went to the CME twice a week, and we've really drifted for a variety of reasons, but COVID obviously shut a lot of that community down, and yesterday was the end of the public health emergency. I think most of us dropped the mask requirement in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and it just strikes me, just walking the halls of the hospital and the clinic, seeing people's smiles and faces, and it's like a cloud has been lifted, and kind of emotional yesterday because you kind of forgot how bad it really was because, it's just, I don't know, I was talking to somebody about boiling the frog or boiling the toad or whatever. It just kind of crept up on us, and we've been living in this funk, for 3 years. So my hope from this is that we resume that community because we haven't been able to gather like this, for 3 years, or at least not in the way that we're accustomed to, and that we find ways to continue to have these gatherings across institutions, across disciplines, and rebuild the community that we've kind of lost and been hidden from each other.
God bless you. You got to loosen up. Loosen up.
So one of your what's next steps was advocacy in the public sphere. I guess I'm a bit at a loss about how we implement that when it seems like there's immovable forces against you. So you're suffering moral distress because I have a lot of sympathy for my OBGYN colleagues right now. So I don't know if you know what's going on in Idaho, but there's a lot of legislation that impacts their practice greatly, and it seems like that is somewhat of an immovable force. I think there's other examples within Idaho, like putting mental health holds on people that don't have psychiatric rooms but have other problems. We can't do that for those patients. So there's other examples of this where it seems like there's an immovable force, which is our legislature, and yet the OBGYN practitioners still have to practice what they feel is good OB care, but can't because of this immovable force. So what do they do with their moral distress? I understand, like, in some respects, the simple answer is to leave the state and go practice in a state that doesn't have these laws. But if you don't want to do that and continue to provide care for patients that you think lives up to your values, how do you deal with that moral distress?
Yeah, and I would like to add to the connection piece. I really feel we need to reconnect humans to each other in person more and having that as our community and start these conversations and also maybe move to a space where we can hold more than one truth really in our mind, where we can be compassionate and respectful and hold people accountable for the effects of the decisions that they make. I think this is where I can hopefully, have conversations with people that are having opposing views and also help them see what impact that has. I can give you like a very small example, but what was very impactful
our hospital in Meridian went into lockdown on early hours of Saturday morning because a family member had threatened to come in and shoot the place down. And working through that, I mean, just the impact that nothing happened in the end. The patient was, per law enforcement, just frustrated and angry with the care. But it's minimizing and normalizing an experience that everybody in that moment had in the hospital. And it's not just about whether or not an ambulance could, arrive within time or so. It's about that space where could everybody that was in the hospital at that time care and be available emotionally for those patients that they were caring for. We do hard things every day and we do them well. But when you add and keep adding on that, but where is that accountability conversation that we have with as society? That's not okay. You are inflicting injury, literal injury, and have impacts. Your words have impacts. And how do we come around that? We acknowledge and validate frustrations. They're real. I get it. And at the same time, this is not okay. If we in healthcare cannot start leading this conversation, if all these brilliant and hardworking people here cannot start connecting over that, I don't think any school, any supermarket, or any other place stands a chance. So I think realizing that we're the beating heart of this society, we are this community, but it starts by having these opportunities to talk about it and find our voices and articulate these things.
That's brilliant. Thank you. That's absolutely brilliant. Other thoughts?
I think just to add what Tilla Michaela was saying is that we work in silos. And I think, so like, I'm sitting next to like the president of IMA, and I'm a past president of IPA, Idaho Psych Association, and we have the same agenda and never saw each other at the legislative session. And that is a problem in our state, where we have state associations who are, and so also hospital systems and organizations that are very like-minded and working separately. And I think if we can come to, maybe ACMS is the answer, I don't know, but where we can all have these conversations and be a collaborative force instead of like IMA is against everything, like that was what I heard when I was testifying. And it's like, well, I'm also talking about what IMA is talking about. And it's just not right where you get flagged as like an opposition when it's more about, I don't want to be opposing you, I want to be informing you. And that takes multiple people in lots of positions having that conversation, but then also coming to your meeting and you coming to mine and that kind of thing. And so I think that it's how we work here, and it can be better. That's all.
From my own personal experience, one of the areas that I was dealing with moral distress was during the sort of the last sort of chapters of the pandemic, when we had vaccinations and so many of our patients. So on paper, we were supposed to have a high vaccination rate, but in reality, it not seen that way, at least among our selection bias of our patients. And I was really incensed by not just the rhetoric on social media from people on the far right, but also people on the left about just get the emojis, whatever, vaccination, and the conversations that were being had with patients in our department. And I wrote a piece that I didn't think was anything at all. I was surprised it got published. It was basically, it made an argument for the role for creating spaces for these types of stories. It's like, how do we create a space for the messy middle? We're not comfortable with the messy. Like, how do we create space that honors the messy middle and invites people to at least take that step in? And I felt like in the conversations that I was being a part of, and I have spent a large part of my later part of my career, especially in things like how can we create these authentic conversations? How do we create the conditions? What conditions are necessary to have these authentic conversations? How do we get people even at the table in the room to have them? And it's really about how do we just make that first step. And you have to be receptive to it. You have to be open to it, and that has to be clear. And I wrote about it, and I got to tell you, like, I never expected this piece to go viral. I never got expected to be invited on CNN for a stupid thing about just, like, talking about stories, inviting people in. But what was actually most impressive was that got a lot of people saying thank you. A lot of people sending me hate mail and hate stuff on Twitter and email that I knew were not going to be positive when there was like you with exclamation points in the title. But what was most impressive and what I was so grateful for was those people who did not get vaccinated and then explained to me in beautiful, cogent ways why they didn't. What were they up against, what were the challenges, what they are doing. I don't trust anybody, I don't have a doctor, I don't know what to believe, but I'm wearing a mask. You know, when I get lumped into the anti-vaxxers, and I don't like that. And it was not one story, you know, and it was so fascinating because people did not just, the radical nature of just creating that space for this type of conversation and knowing that you're heard. And I had people who emailed me and said, someone in Alaska, I shared your piece with my mother who refused to get vaccinated and got vaccinated. And I'm like, why? And why'd you do it? Because we actually just had a conversation. And so how do we create, getting back, how do you create those conditions where people can actually not just speak, but know that they're being heard? And so one of the elements that has been, I think, really key in a lot of the literature, at least around moral injury and moral distress, is making it part of a constant thing. It's a constant presence, not just a reaction to an event, but how do you create these conditions so people know each other? So when something does arise, people know each other. They know from which you're coming from. So how can you create something that is always there, that normalizes this conversation? And you think about possibilities, you don't have to share it, you can think about it on your own, on the smallest level, with amongst your friends, your colleagues, your team, your ward, your clinic, your hospital, your institution, wherever you work.
Yeah, I'll make a comment. To what Susan said about silos, and one of the things that ACMS has long held before I even came was that we're a big round table in the middle of the medical community, and that we create a space for table fellowship, if you will, a place for serendipity to happen, for people to, I've known your name, I've never even met you, you're a floor above me in the hospital, those kind of things that happen. And for the past 8 years, we were really focused on physician well-being, physician vitality, and I just realized wellness is connection. Wellness is connection, right? The reason why physicians feel unwell is because of all the disconnection that has happened because of the way that medicine has grown over the past, 10, 15, 20, whatever years. So how do we start and hold space for that? ACMS stands ready and willing to help organize, publicize, maybe fund a little even. And I look at all the members like Lauren Miller, who started, the Coalition for Safe Reproductive Health, and she created a space for that. I think of Heather Hammerstead, Idaho Women Physicians. I think of Deb's groups, multiple groups that Deb runs, and Ed, different places, Abalash and others like you, Ethan Sims, Clinicians for Climate Health. All of you are doing this, and if we can create space, whether it's a digital space that's regularly held, whether it's an actual space, that's what ACMS really stands by ready to do. But it's me and Jennifer half-time. My capacity is like this much in terms of organizing, and I'm not a physician, though I play one on TV. And so it's really going to take you guys to really lead the way and say, hey, I have this idea, who could I connect with? And we know all sorts of people that might connect around something that you're passionate about, didn't know that someone else is passionate about that too. and you get you two together, a few people, and the synergy that happens from that, we can be that big round table and that space for conversations. In fact, last year our board had that discussion. 10 years we've been working on wellness. What do the next 10 years look like? How do we create a space where ACMS becomes this town hall for communities that are in the medical community to not just hit the medical community, but the public as well, or other places, legislators, industry, insurance companies, the state, whatever. How can we create that? So we're standing by, ready to do that. And my challenge to you will be to speak up and say, I have an idea, and we can help kind of develop that. And my other challenge is re-engage. You know, one of the things that's been frustrating for any membership association, whether it's a church, a school, a membership association, is we're open again. Where is everybody? You know, and people show up about a third, a quarter, not even half the time, and you don't know who's going to show up and when. And they're going, well, where's so-and-so? Well, they were here last week. Where were you? You know, that kind of a thing. And it's that frustration. And I know that a lot of us have dialed back what we've been willing to put our energy to during the pandemic because we're just trying to preserve our strength, right? So my encouragement is as you think about re-engaging, now that the pandemic is over, right, May 11th, now that you're re-engaging, what is the best and most important thing that you can put your energy to, your relational time to? And I can't tell you what that is. You have to decide that for yourself. But I hope it's about bigger issues than maybe some of the things that we kind of fritter our time away on other things. Or maybe things that we did that we got talked into and we really didn't want to. Just don't re-engage there. Just go for the things that really, really matter most.
Thank you. Deb, do you have anything you want to add? Or Ed?
Yeah, I guess I want to start by saying that it really is a lot of people in the community that are doing this. All of these things are happening because we're all working together. You know, it's not just one person. There's just so much collaboration and caring, compassion that people are expressing. There are, I mean, in addition to what Steve's saying in terms of a big round table, can you talk for a moment about the Action Collaborative and share that?
Well, there is a big round table. And about 5 years ago, we started having this idea of there was a lot of anger, and the perspectives were actually quite opposite around some things that were driving physicians nuts around prior authorizations. And we had a meeting. Actually, I think it was in this room. It was in this room, and it was a nasty meeting where insurance executives and regulators and physicians and health systems got together and started pointing fingers at each other in the chest. And after the meeting, Deb walked out and she was saying to me, well, that didn't go so well, did it? And then she said, which I always remember this comment, what do we do next? And so what we did is we had this conversation with everybody in the room, and it turned out that everybody in the room wanted the same thing. We all hate these stupid PAs. And insurance companies hate them because they cost too much money and they don't like telling people how to practice. Docs hate them because they're silly. And sometimes they help patients, but mostly they're just a nuisance. So we decided to figure out how to do this. And over the past couple of years, we've convened a table that has the regulator, the Department of Insurance, Department of Health and Human Services, the IMA is there. I wish IHA would show up. We have all the major systems, all the major payers. That's been a place where we had an open table that looks at problems and sort of says, we have a hypothesis about this, that instead of, we used to call that a problem, we have a constraint, which we used to call a barrier, and then we have a probe, which we used to call a fix. And we actually figure out how to make things better. And what the thing for me about this is it's a table where in relationship, in community, in trust, we have honest conversations that are actually accretive. And it's a great model. You ended up talking to the Montana Medical Association. I ended up talking to the California Medical Association and the Oregon Medical Association, Oregon Health Authority. They're saying, what in the hell's going on in Idaho? You know, like, how are you guys able to do this? And they say, you guys are so polar, you're such a red state. How did you do it? And I said, well, we have a table where anybody can show up, and we honor their stories when they show up. And it's a model for how we actually do this. And so, you know, we've quietly been building that consensus that allows us to have a community and a place to have a convening conversation without judgment. And it's turned out to solve a lot of problems. And I think that that's the model where we need to go to.
So we took that from the medical community and then had another coffee and sat down and talked about how do we do this in the extended community. And so we invited educators and healthcare professionals to come together and form something which we call Compassionate Communities Healthcare Movement. And we actually have invited students and medical students as well to make it intergenerational. And so part of that has been to do something very similar, to convene people around some of the issues that are leading to really decline in public health in our area, and be able to have these kinds of conversations with people that may not agree. And another part is that we've been hosting forums around topics that are relevant right now, such as reproductive rights, things like that. And we generally bring a question and a quote. And we've been pretty amazed at the level of authenticity, kind of like today, where people just really want to talk about these things and share what's going on, but it's very forward motion as well as this is today. It's the idea of let's talk about this, let's hear different ideas, and then what do we do? And I would just offer that part of that model comes from a teacher who did conflict resolution all around the world, a man named John Paul Lederach. And what he said was that, and I know some of you have heard this story, so I apologize, but what he said is the way social change happens is that a small group of people come together and say, this is intolerable. We will not worry that our children are going to be shot on the way to school. But they don't ask first, what will they do? They ask, who do you know? Who do you know that you have a relationship with who'd be willing to come to the table? And so when Ed and I first started the Action Collaborative, that's how it was started. Who do you know that you care about, where we could start the conversation? You already have something in common. There's a relationship. And we have found that that's really been one of the ways perhaps that we can do that. And so in follow-up to this, we're gonna pull together a forum for people that would like to talk more about this subject, and probably in a month or so, and we can let you know. But I guess the main thing is that so many of you have amazing ideas, and you know what's important to you, and you know what you want to talk about and what would be useful. And so it would be wonderful, as Steve said, if you can share that with us, and then we can do our best to try to create those spaces so you can have conversations that are helpful to you. Oh,
yeah, shameless plug. That collaborative meets every other Friday from 8:30 to about 10. Right? We should actually every other month, right? Every other month on a Friday. So if you want, we'll hook you in.
So in that, I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So I just want to, personally thank you all for being here, for participating, for going along, for not throwing fruit at me, or at least if you did, you missed. And it's not lost on me that to get you all in this space and to contribute and to be open and to be game for this experience, which is not a typical experience, was really special for me, and I'm very, very grateful for you being here. And Steve has my email. My email will be on will be on the talk tonight. Feel free to reach out. And I want to thank Steve and the Wellness Committee, and I want to thank you all. And I wish you all gratitude, and I wish you all my best. And thank you so much.
Jay, thank you. Thank you for your humility and vulnerability and taking the risk of bringing us through a journey, an arc, a narrative, really. Not that the story is over, but really it's just the next chapter. So thank you for taking us maybe to some uncomfortable places, right? Let's thank him again. Thanks also to our committee to put this together, our sponsors, St. Luke's, Full Circle Health, Idaho Urologic Institute. For those who aren't going to be, how many are going to be here tonight at the ACMS annual meeting? Most of you. So we'll be here, back here at 6 p.m. For those of you who aren't, I think you're probably tired of my advertisements, but I'll plug it again. June 8th and 9th, Corey Feist from the Dr. Lorna Breen Heroes Foundation will be here. And we'll be talking about mental health stigma among physicians and what we can actually do to change it. There's some very practical things that, you know, people like Ed at Pacific Source and Dan Meltzer at Regents, they're already doing this. St. Luke's Katie is already asking the questions. Other places are already asking the questions. What are the things that physicians are being asked that just aren't appropriate anymore and that drive the seeking of mental health care underground? And those can be changed. And we actually have the opportunity in this state to really get to pervasive change, not just at the Board of Medicine, which has already done the work, but with insurance, credentialing, employers, you know, wherever those questions are being asked. But what are also the other ways that we can lean into stigma around mental health for physicians and others in the healthcare community? So that's June 8th and 9th, a keynote and a workshop just like this. Be very practical and tangible specifics for those who are in that space. September 7th and 8th, this gets to how do we have conversations with people that we don't like or that we don't like their opinions and that don't like ours for that matter too, right? So depolarizing conversations in healthcare, the co-founder of Braver Angels, a national nonpartisan that provokes conversations between reds and blues and promotes how do you actually talk to each other nicely and learn to hear each other. He's going to be here giving not just the general talk, but also specifically in the clinic, how you have those conversations with patients when things, because of politics, have become so polarized that you can't even have a conversation about health issues. So that's going to be another good conversation. There's some cards in the middle of the table. If you have any feedback for us, want to connect to the kind of the next steps, we'd love for you to put that down. And for the rest of you, we'll see you back here tonight at 6 p.m. And thank you all for your time today. Much appreciated.